In the quiet of a March night in 2014, a modern jet with 239 souls on board simply vanished from the sky, leaving behind the greatest mystery in aviation history, night. March 8, 2014. Kuala Lumpur Airport is still awake, though the clock shows well past midnight. The waiting halls are half empty, filled with the smell of coffee and jet fuel. A calm announcement over the loudspeaker calls passengers to board. It's an ordinary flight to Beijing, flight number MH370. In the crowd are businessmen with laptops, tourists with suitcases, families with children. 239 people step aboard the massive silver Boeing 777. For them, it is just another overnight journey. For the world, it will be a night that forever enters the history of aviation. At 0:41, the aircraft lifts off the runway. The engines roar confidently as the crew guides the giant up to cruising altitude. In the cabin, passengers settle in, pull out blankets, some already dozing off. Everything looks absolutely routine. Flight MH370 is no different from hundreds of others. The Boeing 777 is a true symbol of reliability, a plane considered unshakable. Its record, thousands of flights without incidents, millions of passengers carried, the trust of airlines worldwide. Malaysia Airlines, despite financial troubles, had a reputation as a carrier to be trusted, and so this flight seemed anything but extraordinary. In the cockpit sat an experienced commander, Zaharieh Ahmad Shah, a pilot with over 18,000 hours in the air. Calm and focused, he even had a flight simulator at home where he practiced complex routes. Beside him was the first officer, 27-year-old Farik Abdul Hamid. Young, ambitious, standing at the threshold of a great career. With them, 10 more crew members, seasoned flight attendants who knew their work well. Among the passengers were more than 150 Chinese citizens, along with Malaysians, French, Australians, Indonesians. There were a few children on board, some of them very young. For everyone, it was just another journey. Some were heading for business, some going home, some taking their very first long-haul trip. The atmosphere was ordinary. Someone leafed through a magazine. Someone had already fallen asleep. Someone adjusted a pillow. At that moment, no one could have imagined that this night would become the final chapter of their lives. 1:07. The plane cruises at 35,000 feet. Everything is calm. 1:19. Ground control contacts the crew. Malaysian 370, contact Ho Chi Minh on 120.9, good night. The captain replies, good night, Malaysian 370. Those were the last words the world would ever hear from the aircraft. A few minutes later, the transponder, the system that transmits data on speed and altitude, shut down. The plane vanished from civilian radar. For the controllers, it may have looked like a technical glitch, but the signal never returned. Military radars tracked MH370's shadow for a while longer, and that shadow behaved strangely. The plane suddenly turned west, heading into the darkness over the Strait of Malacca. The maneuver was controlled, precise. It did not look like the chaos of an accident. It looked as if someone had deliberately changed the course. Then came hours of silence. Controllers called the flight again and again, but there was no response. No distress signal. No report of a malfunction. Only the night and the ocean. Yet faint handshakes continued to arrive via satellites, weak automatic signals proving the aircraft was still flying. The last of them was received at 8:11 in the morning. This meant MH370 had remained in the air nearly 7 hours after it vanished from radar. What was happening in the cabin during that time? We don't know. The black boxes are silent. We can only imagine, passengers waking and realizing the plane was not on its intended route. Flight attendants trying to remain calm. Pilots either fighting an emergency or deliberately steering the jet into the unknown. At 8:11 the signals stopped, and with them, all hope stopped as well. For the world, flight MH370 simply ceased to exist. On a spring morning, a long-haul service did not reach its planned destination. The airport board first showed delayed and soon after noted that the arrival would not proceed. People in the hall did not yet realize that an unusually complex chapter in air travel was beginning. Early updates were slow and inconsistent. Public reports shifted focus from one region to another. First a southern sea, later a narrow strait to the west. Key details were not shared promptly. Information became muddled across teams, and with each hour the chance to find clear answers diminished. In the first days, the search seemed unorganized. Planes took off, ships moved across wide areas, but it all looked more like guessing than a clear plan. People following the news could not understand. How could a modern aircraft simply stop sending signals? How could no one know its exact path? Each report only added to the confusion. Some notices spoke about unusual marks on the water. Others mentioned items that later turned out to be unrelated. Every small hope was quickly replaced by disappointment. With time it became clear, the situation was larger than a single region. Many countries became involved, and what followed was the biggest search of its kind in history. At first, the focus was on one sea area. Later, new satellite data suggested that the plane had continued flying for hours and likely reached a very distant part of the Southern Ocean. This meant all earlier efforts had missed the target. A new, wide-ranging operation began. One country took the lead in the southern zone, using underwater devices, scanning equipment, and long-range planes. The search area was enormous, hundreds of thousands of square kilometers, with strong currents and extreme depths. The project cost hundreds of millions. Many nations participated together, in a unique form of cooperation, and yet even that could not guarantee success. The ocean stayed quiet. No confirmed pieces, no clear signals, only endless water holding its secrets. For those waiting, it was extremely difficult. They saw constant updates and search efforts, but no results. Reports kept changing. Some suggested one outcome, others hinted at a completely different one. Each new statement divided the fragile sense of hope. In time, the effort was officially described as the most costly and wide-ranging search ever attempted in aviation. And still nothing clear was found. That was when the world realized, we can send people far into space. We can track tiny details across the planet. But locating one missing aircraft can be nearly impossible. The search gave no final answers, and new ideas began to form. Each had its strengths, its weaknesses, and its supporters. The first and most straightforward idea was a technical failure. Even though the model was known for reliability, it was still a machine, and machines can break down. One suggestion was a sudden loss of cabin pressure. Imagine, the oxygen drops, the crew becomes unresponsive. Passengers remain still in their seats. The aircraft continues flying on autopilot until fuel is gone. This could explain hours in the air without contact. But there was a problem. Even with pressure loss, the crew should have had a few moments to send some kind of alert, press a signal, or say a single word. None of that happened. The silence was total. Another idea was fire or smoke. If something started in the cockpit or storage area, the pilots might have shut down systems to avoid further problems. But again, why no signal at all? Why were the movements of the aircraft so precise and steady? It did not look like a crew fighting to save control. Other hypotheses were also suggested: an explosion, engine failure, structural collapse. Yet none of them explained everything. Yes, a technical malfunction was possible. But how then to explain the turn, the 7 more hours of flight, and the accuracy of the route? That is why the world turned its attention to another theory. The one that always sparks the most controversy: the human factor. When people speak of the human factor in disasters, they usually mean crew error. But in the story of MH370, the phrase took on an entirely different meaning. A hypothesis emerged. Captain Zahari may have deliberately led the aircraft into the depths of the ocean. At one point, attention turned to the captain. Investigators noted that he had a home simulator with a route somewhat similar to the one taken by the aircraft that night. To some, this looked suspicious. In addition, the sharp turns in the flight path appeared to be carried out with the skill of an experienced pilot. Someone clearly knew how to handle the plane. But could the captain truly have been responsible? Friends described him as calm, steady, and passionate about his work. He lived an ordinary life, surrounded by family, with no clear reasons to do anything unusual. There was no message left behind, no clear explanation. Even so, this idea was not dismissed, since he was the one in control of the plane. He could have been the person who turned off systems or changed direction. This possibility divided public opinion. Some found it convincing, others thought it too hard to accept. If true, the disappearance would not have been caused by a mechanical failure, but by a deliberate human choice. Imagine, passengers asleep in their seats, the night flight calm as usual, while one person in the cockpit knew it would never reach its destination. And yet questions remained. Why no explanation? Why no message? Without answers, this idea stayed only a theory. Other possibilities were also discussed. Some suggested outside interference. 2 travelers on board were found with false documents. At first this caused suspicion, but later it was shown they were simply trying to migrate illegally, with no harmful intent. Speculation continued. Could someone else on board have forced a change of course? But there was never any claim of responsibility. That silence itself was unusual. Over time, the idea of outside interference began to fade. Another explanation took its place. The possibility of withheld information. Why was important data shared so slowly? Why did early reports about the search differ so much? Why did it take a week before certain satellite findings were made public? Some countries also released their own tracking details with significant delay. This raised doubts. Was more known than had been officially said? Alternative theories grew from there. Some speculated about mistakes during defensive monitoring. Others wondered about unusual items on board. The official lists of passengers and cargo had a few inconsistencies, which led to further questions. Could the flight have been transporting something that was never meant to be found? Conspiracy always has a way of capturing the imagination. But the problem was the same. There was little real evidence, only coincidences, suspicious delays, contradictory statements. Still, for many of the passengers' families, the official version felt too convenient. The plane crashed in the Indian Ocean, all are dead. Without wreckage, without black boxes, it looked more like an attempt to put an end to a story that had no end. And so, the more time passed, the more people believed. The truth was being hidden. And perhaps it was far more terrifying than any technical failure could ever explain. A year had passed since the disappearance of Flight MH370. Families of passengers lived suspended between despair and hope. Some believed the plane had landed somewhere in a secret location. Others, that it had plunged into the depths of the ocean, but there was no proof. And then, on July 29, 2015, the waves washed a large piece of debris onto the shore of the French island of Réunion in the Indian Ocean. It was part of a flaperon, a section of the wing used during landing. Experts immediately suspected it was from a Boeing 777. And since no other aircraft of this model had disappeared in that region, there was little doubt. The debris belonged to MH370. The world froze once again. It seemed like confirmation at last. The plane had indeed crashed into the ocean. But instead of an answer, the fragment raised new questions. Why did the fragments appear so far from the main search area? Could ocean currents really have carried them across such vast distances? And most importantly, where was the rest of the aircraft? The search was restarted with new energy. Over the following years, more pieces were discovered on distant shores of Africa and islands in the Indian Ocean. Parts of wings, doors, interior panels. Some carried visible marks that suggested a strong impact with water. Yet even with these discoveries, the picture remained incomplete. From an aircraft more than 60 meters long, only small pieces were recovered. No tail section, no engines, no flight recorders, just scattered parts quietly returned by the sea. For those waiting, this was deeply difficult. On one hand, the fragments confirmed what had been feared. On the other, they left the puzzle even more unsettling. The pieces were silent, They did not explain why the route had changed. They did not reveal what took place in the cockpit. They gave no answer to the central question: how could such a large plane vanish without trace in a world where even small boats are tracked? Specialists examined every piece in detail. Some believed the damage showed a high-speed impact. Others thought the shape suggested a more controlled descent onto water. And once again, there was no single explanation. The ocean did not give up its secrets. From time to time, it placed fragments on the shore, as if to remind us that the missing plane was still out there, somewhere beneath the surface. But where exactly, and why it ended up there, remained unknown. Each fragment, instead of providing closure, was a reminder of how little we truly knew. No event of this kind is measured only by scattered parts or cold data. It is measured by human experience. The story of MH370 is also the story of those left behind. In the first hours after the disappearance, relatives and friends were gathered in a hotel near the airport. There they heard the first announcement: contact had been lost. Some began to weep, others refused to believe it. A few kept repeating, "It's only a system problem. They will land. They must land." Days passed. Hope began to fade. And then came the struggle for information. People demanded clarity from the airline and stronger action from officials. But the longer it went on, the more they received conflicting reports. One moment the search was in one sea, the next it had moved to another. One day there was talk of debris, the next it was dismissed as unrelated objects. This confusion was unbearable. Groups of relatives organized demonstrations, wrote letters, and spoke to the press. They wanted answers. Weeks, months, and years passed. But the pain never truly faded. Some parents still keep their children's rooms exactly as they were on the day of departure. Some return each year to memorial sites with photographs of their loved ones. For them, time stopped that night. This story also showed another side of human nature. Many had little money to keep traveling or to demand investigations. They joined together, formed support groups, and shared information. For them, it was not only about grief, it was about fairness. "We have the right to know," they repeated, and their voices kept the search alive, even when the official chances of finding the aircraft were almost gone. And perhaps it is thanks to these people that the story of MH370 has not been forgotten. For the wider world, it may be an aviation riddle. For them, it is mothers and fathers, children and friends who never returned. Years passed, but the story of MH370 never disappeared from newspaper headlines and television screens. Because it was not only a tragedy for the families of the passengers, it was a blow to the very heart of the aviation industry. Until 2014, we lived with the belief that aviation was the safest and most closely monitored form of transport. Yes, accidents happened from time to time, but almost always we knew the reason. There were always black boxes, radar data, recordings of conversations. MH370 shattered that illusion. A plane could simply vanish, without a trace, without explanation. Aviation experts around the world realized the rules had to change. And indeed, after the disappearance of the flight, new requirements appeared. Now aircraft must transmit their location more frequently and more precisely. Projects emerged for new, smart black boxes, capable of detaching from the aircraft and floating to the surface in the event of a crash. Airlines were given recommendations to monitor pilots' psychological health more thoroughly than ever before. In a sense, the passengers of MH370 became victims who changed aviation forever. Their tragedy forced the world to admit, even in the 21st century, we are not as powerful as we like to believe. Yet despite all the reforms, the main lesson has never been learned. We still do not know what happened that night. We can only construct theories, argue, analyze fragments. But the ultimate truth lies hidden somewhere in the depths of the Indian Ocean. And so MH370 became not only an aviation disaster, it became a symbol of our vulnerability. A symbol that even in a world of satellites, GPS, and constant monitoring, there can still exist a place where time stops, and answers never arrive. More than 10 years have passed since that night, and yet Flight MH370 still haunts the world. It is not just an air disaster, it is a mystery that has become a symbol of our helplessness in the face of the unknown. We can send probes to Mars, we can watch from space as cars move through the streets of cities, but we still cannot provide a clear answer to how an entire Boeing 777, with more than 200 people on board, could simply vanish. This story left shadows behind, families still searching for truth, researchers who have spent years analyzing every signal, every fragment, theorists who continue to argue over what really happened that night. The debris found on the shores of Africa confirmed the plane had crashed into the ocean, but it did not explain why. The black boxes were never found. They lie somewhere in the depths of the Indian Ocean, perhaps several thousand meters below the surface. And as long as they remain silent, the truth remains hidden. Over the years, dozens of theories have been proposed: technical malfunction, human factor, hijacking, conspiracy, each with its arguments, but none providing a final answer. And perhaps that is the essence of the MH370 mystery, that even in a world of technology and constant surveillance, there can still be places where truth slips through our hands. Flight MH370 became not only a tragedy for hundreds of families, it became a symbol that even the most advanced systems cannot guarantee absolute safety. A symbol that humanity remains vulnerable to nature, to chance, and to the unknown. The story of MH370 has no period. It has only 3 dots. And as long as the ocean keeps its silence, those dots will remain to remind us. Some mysteries may never be solved,